record and share my screen. So welcome everyone to Service Design for Creatives who think in terms of systems. If you are someone who likes to have the bird's eye view of things in your current career path or in your work life in general, service design might be the path for you. And we're going to talk about what it is and how to get into it. My name is Samaya. I'm a co-founder at Ideate Labs previously and currently am the founder at UX Woman. I bring about 9 years of expertise to UX across startups, consulting, and corporate, and I've specialized in inclusive design for brands like Disney, Hulu, and Marvel as well. And we have a lot of topics to cover in today's session. I would love it if you could use the chat to ask me any questions, and I will answer as many questions as I can after we finish with all the material for today. But we're going to talk about service design mindsets for career changers, service design and freelance work, how service design relates to both freelance work, UX stakeholder management, and consulting UX jobs in particular. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it with what is service design in comparison to other UX design career paths, what are the service design processes and deliverables, what are front stage and backstage processes within service design, and those terms will make sense as you start to learn what service design is, and how do we, talk about service design versus designing a service or even designing a business, which is really exciting as well. So with that, let's get started and talk about some service design mindsets. So a lot of what we do at UX Woman is work with career changers who have had really fulfilling careers that, span anywhere between 2 to 10 years, maybe even 20 years, and they're now looking to transition into a new career. So a lot of the folks that we've worked with are a lot of mid to senior level professionals who are seeking UX career changes, and they come with really impressive backgrounds with careers in education, healthcare, marketing, nonprofits, customer service, project and product management, sales and admin roles that they're ready to leave behind and take on a new role. And they're really excited for a UX career, but they all often feel that they have to start from scratch. And they feel this lack of confidence in their UX design capabilities, which is understandable. So what they end up doing is they start applying to a lot of junior and entry-level UX design roles that pay anywhere between 85 to 120K per year. And yes, while it's true that they might be new to Figma and that they could use some honing and refreshing with their Figma skills, UX design is not the only viable UX career path for a lot of these professionals. So what we do is we help a lot of the mid to senior level professionals who come from other career paths understand what their transferable skills are, and we help them rebrand to more mid to senior level UX research and UX design roles. And that means that they get paid anywhere between 130K to 240K in today's job market. And it's really about understanding what those transferable skills are and rebranding those transferable skills. And guess what? Service design is one of those transferable skill sets. So what are some of those transferable skill sets that could lead to some mid to senior level UX researcher or product designer or UX designer roles? So if you come from a career where you have done sort of any type of project management or project scoping expertise, you've managed budgets for a project or multiple projects, that is really crucial and key expertise that, will place you above a junior level role. If you are very, knowledgeable about stakeholder management, especially in corporate settings, and you've worked across cross-functional teams to, go through projects and oversee projects and move projects along, that is a really great transferable skill set as well. And that is more of a mid to senior level skill set. If you have expertise facilitating and leading workshops and meetings in corporate, that is another extremely transferable skill set. And then, of course, service design, which is what we're going to be talking about today. If you've ever improved and optimized internal processes at your company that has led to a decrease in costs, an increase in revenue, an increase in conversion rates, running the business more smoothly, scaling the business. Those are all really great service design elements, and you can be, highlighting and marketing that type of expertise that you have when approaching your UX job search. Cross-functional collaboration, like we mentioned, along with stakeholder management. And of course, measuring impact is one of the biggest, most crucial elements. So especially if you have metrics to what you're saying that you did, that is a really, really strong resume that you have. So these transferable skills are incredibly valuable when rebranding to more of a mid to senior level UX career path. But it's also important to address certain knowledge gaps in UX and, be aware of any knowledge gaps that you have. So what our alumni do is they address their knowledge gaps by joining our 7-month UX design MBA. And some of those knowledge gaps you need to think about are, advanced UX methods. We really focus on discovery UX research, which is more of a mid to senior level skill set, even at the founder level. If you're thinking of starting your own freelance UX business or consulting business, or you have expertise in an industry and would like to start a business in that area, those skill sets are really important. Trauma-informed UX research methods, facilitating UX workshops and ideation sessions. Again, that's not something a junior designer or researcher does, but that is more of a senior level skill set, as well as conducting observational studies. So especially if you're bridging into the world of physical products as well as digital products, and you need to observe users or stakeholders work with machinery or work within a certain environment, observational studies become really crucial. And we also help our, alumni learn both qualitative and quantitative UX methods so that they can really justify the impact that they're having with their product idea or their feature idea. Another element that is part of service design, but also more of an advanced UX research method for mid to senior level designers and researchers is the ability to scope products, features, and of course, project scoping, which is more within the freelance UX and consulting world. So by really, understanding the end-to-end UX design process and understanding when to apply certain qualitative and quantitative methods, we're able to really, teach our students to evaluate product and feature ideas from a business, technical, and operations perspective, and really think through the feasibility of their ideas. And this requires an understanding of the business model of their product and service, and also a really thoughtful understanding of the markets that they're about to enter from a business perspective. Another element is product positioning and product marketing. So if you're interested in service design, especially if you want to start your own UX freelancing business or go into consulting, half your job is going to be selling, and it's going to be selling the design process, selling your capabilities to prospective clients, and really understanding product positioning and product marketing, both for the service that you're providing, but also for the service of your clients, right? So again, going back to the business thinking and business model thinking, you have to really take the time to really understand your client's business model and really understand how you can help them grow and scale their business or enter new markets. So we teach things like blue ocean strategy to position product ideas. We talk about undersaturated markets, invisible markets, and how to provide low-cost, high-value solutions to a community that tends to be ignored by mainstream markets and brands. And so we try to help our students scope really aspirational and innovative products and feature ideas with really obvious differentiators, right? A business only succeeds if it's different from competitors. And if you're just being a copycat, whether you're starting a consulting business or your own startup, you're always going to be 3 to 4 steps behind your competitors. So that what we teach is innovation, right? Really getting fresh insights, new insights, rethinking the status quo of today to really come up with something new. Think about the Airbnbs of the world, the Ubers of the world. They completely redefined the way that we as consumers think and approach businesses, right? And that's the kind of thinking you want to stay ahead of the competition and enter a new market space and start a new business or help your client do that. And then we also have to think about product pricing, monetization, and business models. So I know I repeat myself on the business side of things, but it's really crucial to have a really solid understanding of how a startup business model is put together for the simplest version of its product or the MVP version of its product, and then understanding how a business scales over time. I have worked in consulting, and I've noticed that, a lot of consultants don't really have an idea of the business model of their clients. And sometimes their client projects fail, right? And they lose clients because they weren't able to deliver on the business model and the business impact. So yes, you might, be really good at sales and marketing and, product positioning and service positioning. But if you want to attract and keep certain corporate clients, and really have that credibility as a UX freelancer or a UX consultant, you need to understand their business model. You need to help them grow and scale over time. So with that, what we found is, really addressing those knowledge gaps really helps our career changers, especially those who come from previous careers, really highlight more mid to senior level skill sets, and then transfer over successfully and land senior product designer and UX researcher roles. We also already talked about, scaling and business scaling. And so you can always check out our website to hear directly from our alumni. But Angelina pivoted from quality assurance and graphic design into a senior product designer role. We also had Kristen, who was a graphic designer and art director for over 5 years, and then she transitioned into a senior product designer role. Valerie has a really interesting background. She was a physical therapist for about 10 years, and then she took a class on Scrum management, and then she took our UX class as well. And she was able to rebrand into a UX lead and management role at CVS Corporate using her transferable skill sets in healthcare, Scrum management, and UX. Yasmin came from a 10+ year career as a Starbucks manager, and she was incredible with customer service and stakeholder management. And she just had those people skills. She knows how to sell. She can talk to anybody in the room. And she was able to rebrand to a senior UX researcher role. Velvet came from a 5+ year background as an elementary school teacher and was able to pivot into a mid-level UX researcher role, and she's currently a senior UX researcher. So those are some of our alumni and our alumni stories. And you can, I'll send you a link where you can hear about their transition into UX from their perspective. So with that, let's talk about service design and freelance work. So especially in this economy right now, freelance UX career paths are exploding, and we're seeing a lot more gig economy work in the UX space. So I know that a lot of folks who are transitioning are potentially interested in landing UX freelance roles or contract roles, and there's definitely pros and cons to consider when you're thinking about UX freelance work, gig work, and contract work. So the pros of UX freelance work means that you have the flexibility to plan your own schedule. It's mostly remote and remote opportunities. You can be your own boss, and you define your optimal design process for your clients. However, there's also a lot of cons to UX freelance work. This means that you're responsible for sales and marketing. And if you are someone who doesn't like sales and marketing, it's probably better for you to, stick to a full-time position. But if sales and marketing is something that excites you and something that you're willing to learn, or you have a natural talent for it, then, this is definitely a viable career path. You'll have to learn how to run and operate your own business and set up your own LLC or incorporation. And you'll have to factor in your benefits. So health insurance, especially when determining your pay rate, whether it's an hourly pay rate or a flat fee pay rate. And we've had some alumni who really successfully gone on to freelance straight out of graduating. So Jennifer was one of them. She came from a 10-year career as a therapist. So there were a lot of UX research skill sets that she had that transferred over into her new UX career. And as she was graduating from our class, she was just talking to folks in her network and talking about the course and what she was learning. And one of her, people or acquaintances in her network happened to be operating a school and needed a service design project. that required a lot of UX research work. So we worked with her to scope and create a scope of work for that service design project. And she pitched that to her client and landed the gig. And that was a 3-month gig that she took on as she was graduating. Same thing with Ilona. Ilona graduated. She came from a nonprofit background, so she had spent many years in nonprofit work. And she's an incredibly talented researcher and designer. And soon after she graduated from our course, she was able to take on freelance work for a lot of startups. And because she understood the end-to-end design process and understood senior level skill sets like scoping, she was always able to stay one step ahead of her client and anticipate the needs of that client and keep pitching projects. So she kept getting, 2 or 3 month contracts from her loyal base of a couple of startup clients. And she developed a really great relationship with these clients who really trusted her to deliver incredible work that she's still in touch with them today, about 4 years into her UX career. And she continues to freelance and build relationships, which is one of the incredible, most useful tools in service design, if you can, build and maintain those client relationships. So unfortunately, a lot of UX courses and boot camps don't prepare their graduates for UX freelance work. And it's because UX curriculums tend to focus on production level work. So basically learning Figma, you already get a brief or client project that's already scoped for you. So you don't get to push back on the client brief. And, unfortunately, production level work is going to soon be replaced, if not already replaced by AI. When I was a junior researcher, one of my primary roles in consulting was to take notes for the senior researchers. And right now, AI takes notes for me, right? So a lot of those junior level tasks are already being replaced, which means that we have to rely, even if we are more junior in the UX space, we have to rely on our strategic work, our creative outputs, our ideation, our unique perspective that we bring to the table, because AI is taking over those production level tasks. So what we really have to do is we need to be informed based on, business strategy and UX research. And we have to, start to think about service design so that we can start to design our own freelance UX business, because that's just becoming more and more common within this economy. And what does that include exactly? So that means creating marketing materials or prototypes that attract the right types of clients by articulating your offerings in really compelling ways to really attract different types of clients. So obviously, when you're first starting your UX freelance business, you're not going to be targeting big name brands and clients, but you need to figure out, based on your industry expertise or niche, what are the types of clients who want to work with you, and how can you start to attract them, and creating those marketing materials and those lead generation tools to attract the right type of client to you. We have to really, in service design and building a UX freelance business, we really have to understand the psychology of sales. And we have to think about how we treat our sales calls like an interview. There's a lot of UX research skill sets that actually translate over to sales and marketing. And a lot of people think that, selling is about creating a sales pitch or a beautiful sales deck, but that's far from true. The best salespeople I have met tend to be entrepreneurs, directors, managers, and even designers who can really ask the right questions and then propose options that then the client is really receptive to. So it's not really about selling a tried and true pitch, but it's really about asking the right questions and providing options and different pricing points and tiers, and then seeing what your client is leaning towards. We also need to think about scoping work with the client, right? So knowing that we need to be able to push back on a client if the client is, not very receptive to, say, the UX research portion of the scoping, or just wants wireframes delivered right away. And what our job is to educate our client on the design process and why we're doing what we're doing, so that we can tell them, hey, the reason we're doing this is because we need to measure a baseline, and then we can see whether we actually create an impact in the first place. So how you talk and educate your clients and prospective clients about the design process is really a key element in the service design world as well. And that leads me to the next thing, which is defining impact metrics and delivering on impact metrics. When you're starting to scope a project with a client, you want to understand what's their baseline, and you want to show them how you're going to improve their baseline through the UX methods that you are applying. And then you have proof that UX really works. UX is good for business. UX can push the needle, right? Whether that means reduced cost, time saved, increased revenue, increased conversion rates, increased engagement. Start to think about what you can measure, what's available to measure right now, or what measurement do you need to put in place so that you can actually track the impact of your work. And of course, when that's not possible, a lot of times, a lot of companies are just not set up to measure impact or measure what you need measured. Then it's really focused on those soft skills. It's really focused on really building really thoughtful relationships with your clients, whether it's a recurring client or whether it's a first-time client, and really massaging that relationship and really delivering based on how you co-work together and whether you can create this co-creation process that suits both of your styles, right? So with that, we're also going to talk about UX service design in relation to UX stakeholder management and consulting jobs in particular. So there's, certain common pitfalls that UX career changers make when they try to manage stakeholders within a UX project. And a lot of times there's not enough co-creating with cross-functional stakeholders, especially when you're new to UX. You can feel really insecure or get really defensive when it comes to inviting stakeholders from a variety of different functions and perspectives to co-create and collaborate with you within the UX design process. This is absolutely necessary, though, for UX, right? The best UX comes from collaboration, and the best ideas come from this co-creation process that we build together to really innovate on our ideas and make them even better. And if we're new to UX, we can be afraid of failure or even discussing our failures, right? Yes, we are in a very metrics-driven corporate world, right? And that can be scary, which means, a lot of times some of our ideas might not hit the mark. Our ideas might fail. And it can feel job threatening to discuss that failure within projects, or ways to improve project processes the next time around. However, if you're trying to build healthy work cultures and healthy relationships with clients, it becomes really crucial to discuss those failures without penalizing yourself, your team members, and finding solutions to improve project outcomes in the future, right? So we have to build on this learning mindset when we think about, talking about failure and discussing failure and making room for some amount of error or failure. And a lot of times UX designers and career changers are not very confident in their UX methodology or their design process. And so this can lead them to want to try and, not push back on their clients, first of all, or their manager, but also, feel scared or insecure about putting themselves out there in terms of a freelancer or consultant. So what can we do to kind of think about those elements of stakeholder management, especially if we want to go into consulting and stakeholder management within the realm of service design? We need to think about our unique co-creation processes, right? So if you were to start a UX freelancing business or work as a consultant for like IDEO, for example, how are you pulling in stakeholders? How are you getting them involved? How are you making them excited about the project, right? Half of it is a sales job, right? As a consultant or freelancer, you're selling to your client 24/7, even if it's indirect sales. So that often means pulling them in, getting them involved with the UX process, making sure that they feel heard and seen when it comes to their ideas and their inputs on the project. Yes, you might not use every single one of their inputs, but you need to make sure that you're collecting that information and somehow considering it and showing how you're considering all their different perspectives. So part of it is the show, right? When I was a consultant, we would come to client meetings with a lot of sticky notes and big poster boards, and we would listen to the client and take notes down and put sticky notes up on the board. Part of it is performative. Part of it is the sales job of showing that we are really actively engaged and that we're co-creating together. And then the client gets really excited by that energy. They see us sketch rough elements and concepts, and then they start sketching, right? That's a really good stakeholder meeting or client meeting when you can get the client to become more creative, especially when they come from more rigid industries like healthcare or finance. And so what we do is, as consultants or freelancers, we need to start to foster a learning mindset around successes and failures. So again, creating that culture where we really talk openly about qualitative and quantitative methods, and we discuss, okay, what is the metric for failure versus what's the metric for success? Because it's cut and dry, it's black and white, and it's okay to fail, right? None of us, UX and creative is a very subjective field. We're not always going to be 100% confident or even 80% confident that our ideas are going to increase revenue. We can only keep iterating and trying and getting closer to the mark, right? So being really open about that and talking about the fact that we will need multiple iterations to keep pushing the needle forward, right? We're growing and scaling their business gradually. It's not going to happen overnight. And being really, just open about that and being able to showcase both success and failure without getting defensive or insecure about the data. Remember that a failed UX project has nothing to do on your ability as a designer, but has everything to do with just, the markets, the idea, and you are not the idea, right? You are someone who generates multiple ideas. You're someone who lives and breathes the process, not the outcome. And it's okay to have multiple failures before you hit on a success. And so if you can create that kind of culture with your clients, with your within your teams, then it really opens up the whole team to more creativity and less of a slap on the wrist in case something fails. Which is something that we really need to be aware of, and we need to build that over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And then, all of this stakeholder management leads to more confidence when presenting UX methodologies and the design process. So when we are creating that sales pitch to our prospective clients, we have to kind of bake in that idea that, hey, we might fail a couple of times before we hit on that success. We have to be okay with those failures, but most importantly, we have to learn from those failures so that we keep doing better the next time and the next time and the next. So with that, that's kind of giving you a sense of the world of service design as it relates to UX freelance work, consulting, stakeholder management, and even transferable skill sets from previous careers. So what is the definition of service design? So service design is the process of optimizing backstage processes within a company so that the front stage customer-facing processes run smoothly or can even be expanded. So service design goes beyond process optimization, and it bleeds into designing a business and evaluating business operations. So if you have ever internally optimized internal processes for a business, that is service design. And whatever you have done internally has helped the business provide better for their customers and clients. That is service design. And service design is that activity of planning and organizing a business's resources, so their people, their props, their processes, in order to directly improve the employee's experience and indirectly the customer's experience. So that's the definition from Nielsen Norman Group. Service design is this process where designers create sustainable solutions and optimal experiences for both customers in unique contexts and any service providers involved. So designers break services into sections and then adapt fine-tuned solutions to suit all the user's needs in that context. So based on the actors, the location, and other factors. So that's a definition from the Interaction Design Foundation. Just to kind of give you an idea of some of the definitions out there. And again, Nielsen Norman Group and Interaction Design Foundation are mostly focused on UX consulting. So this is what brands like IDEO do when they're out consulting for the big name Fortune 500s. And I'll show you an example, a more tangible example of service design, because I know this seems very theoretical, and unless you see a project, you're not going to fully get what it is. So my own journey into service design started really early in my career, where I was a design researcher for, frog design, consulting for Fortune 500 companies like Ford, J&J, and Meta. And it was really fun to be able to work on these service design projects and optimize internal operations at a global level for some of these clients. And so what I did was I worked as a design researcher in consulting, and then I moved on and worked as a senior UX researcher at an e-commerce company, setting up research practices for them based on what I'd learned from consulting. And then I finally, years later, co-founded Ideate Labs, and actually designed a service, right? So I got to experience all the elements of service design, starting as a, junior in my career, and really focusing on, working with senior designers and researchers to manage Fortune 500 clients, moving into setting up my own research practices for a company as a solo researcher at the company, and then setting up my own business and designing my own business. So that's the full spectrum of what service design can involve. So one example of service design is we really helped a client that was that had global product packaging processes. So imagine that this is a client that's global. They have multiple brands that are, consumer goods that they sell throughout the world. And so what we had to do was interview about 20 internal stakeholders across packaging, design, manufacturing, engineering, formulation, regulatory, and more. And then we started to conduct workshops to really understand their pain points for this global packaging process and frustrations that came up internally as these different functions had to work together at a global level, at a regional level, and at a local level. So they got kind of their brief on the product at the global level, but all those briefs had to be localized to regional levels, right? So there was Asia Pacific, there was the European markets, there was the North American and South American markets, and then there was localization in terms of translating that packaging to French or Spanish or Ukrainian, right? So there were so many different elements involved, and then formulations would change depending on the regulatory requirements of the different countries. So it was a highly complex project and a highly complex internal process to really optimize. And so what we did was we took all that interview data, we took all those, global workshop data, and we synthesized all of that into a process map or service design blueprint that depicted the ideal global packaging design and manufacturing process at the global, regional, and local levels. So this is kind of what it looked like, right? This is like our final deliverable. This took months of work, right? It took months of work interviewing stakeholders, gathering all the context necessary to really pinpoint what the ideal process should look like. And this was all the research and strategy work, because what we had to do next was actually build an internal tool for that large client to maintain their global packaging processes, and for the client to manage the planning, the content development, the content adaptations, the mechanical print work needed going from the global level to the local level. And so the ultimate deliverable was going to be this internal tool that would optimize this really frustrating process of collaborating and cross-functional work at a global level. So that's one example of service design. Another example of service design was we had another client that really would consolidate manual Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints to really, present supply chain metrics at the global level, regional level, and local level. So what would have to happen is throughout the world, because this was a global client, they would have to take those Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and then they would, consolidate all of that at the local level. Then there would be a regional manager who would consolidate all the local data into the regional data or the regional metric level. And then there were regional managers who would have to consolidate that data into a global level so that those metrics could be passed on to executives at the company. So our job was to create a supply chain dashboard that showed data roll-ups from the local level to the regional level to the global level, so that executives had that bird's eye view of how the business was operating, how the business was running, and had that bird's eye view of a handful of different metrics that they needed to know about on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, depending on how reporting was structured and what data was the most important to them. And so again, this meant that we had to interview a lot of key stakeholders and then start to design that internal tool to help with the data roll-ups for this company. And so that's another kind of tangible project that you would be doing if you were to be a consultant in the service design space. Another example is designing a business, right? So as I moved up in my career, I became a UX freelancer. I started to take on clients of my own. They were smaller startup clients, and I would kind of work through the process with them. And then finally, I learned enough about business strategy and entrepreneurship to co-found Ideate Labs with my partner at that time. And so we had to create processes for optimizing sales, marketing, mentor and curriculum development processes. And this was the first time that I had designed a successful revenue generating business. So that's, ultimately really understanding the business model and then scaling a business is where you're going towards as you're becoming a senior service designer. So what are some service design processes and deliverables? There's certain components of service design. So again, we talked about people, props, and processes. When we talk about people, we're talking about employees, customers, partners, communities of customers, vendors, perhaps. When we're talking about props, we're talking about physical spaces, we're talking about digital spaces, objects like digital files and physical collateral. And then when we're talking about processes, we're talking about both internal and external processes. So customers making purchases or employees conducting sales processes. So one example of like people for that global packaging project was we were working across, packaging, design, manufacturing, regulatory, formulation. So those were all the employees we were considering. We were working across different consumer brands, right? So this global company had 10 or 20 different consumer brands that they had to provide for at a global level. And then we were also thinking about their partners and vendors. They had local vendors who would actually print their packaging and their labels at the different locations, the manufacturing locations. When we were thinking about props for this company, we were thinking about the artwork for their labeling, the ingredient list for their labeling, the regulatory concerns around distributing their products to different countries, depending on the region and the localization. And then when we thought about processes, we had to think about their manufacturing processes and how that related to packaging and labeling as well. So what you're going to see is that service design sort of bleeds into the goods and services world, right? Most companies are a mix of goods and services, even if they might be solely digital or solely digital driven. So a great example of this is Netflix. Netflix licenses content, which are films and shows, as individual goods or products, but provides the service of a content subscription to their end customers. So if we're thinking about service design for a company like Netflix, we have to think about those processes for localization of content licensing as Netflix licenses their content to other vendors or other streaming services or TVs, for example. And we also want to think about how they go about localization and collaborating with local studios around the world, which is a really exciting case study we talk about in our class. And when we think about these service design principles, we have to think about, again, user-centered principles. So we really have to focus on qualitative research as the foundation, interviews with both stakeholders and customers alike. We need to be co-creative. We need to co-create with our stakeholders and users via ideation workshops. We need to be really thoughtful about our sequencing. We need to break down the service into a variety of processes so that we can break it down for each team to operate and to pass on the end deliverable in a really smooth manner, saving the company both time, money, effort, resources, and increasing employee engagement. We need to be evidence-based. We need to visualize the services and make them tangible and build trust across these different teams. A lot of times when we come in as a consultant, we see that there's distrust, there's blame that's being placed between the teams because of all these frustrations that come up. And so we're doing a little bit of change management. We're doing a little bit of being a therapist for our client, right? We need to make sure that it's not a blame game, but that it's just something about, having the right handoffs and really defining what those handoffs are to really optimize operations at the company. We need to be really holistic. We need to think of that bird's eye view of the entire business processes, all of the business operations for the company, how the business, makes their money and scales. And that gives us that ability to be the bird's eye view because all these cross-functional teams are so embedded into their day-to-day work. And sometimes they're really siloed, right? They don't have the chance to see that bird's eye view perspective. So it's our job as the consultant to bring that bird's eye view to them and remind them how the business works as a whole to deliver the end product or service. And so what are some benefits of service design? What you're going to see is that service design is really more about the soft skills. It's about surfacing conflict. A lot of times we're really listening to all the frustrations that each team has and how each team is working together to actually run the business or operate on that business model. So the business model might be something that, executives have in their mind, but when the business model is actually put into practice across all these different teams, there's a lot of frustration, a lot of conflict, a lot of tension that comes up. And our job is to smooth out that tension. We have to facilitate really hard conversations. We have to expose weak links in procedures and processes and policies. And that can almost, get the client defensive or get these different cross-functional teams defensive, right? Because no one likes to feel like they're not doing a good job. So as a consultant, we need to be really thoughtful about how we have those hard conversations and how we showcase the gaps in processes without blaming anyone within the client teams. We also have to reduce redundancy. We have to expose waste in processes and procedures, as well as frustrations. We have to provide that bird's eye view to executives, right? Thinking back to that supply chain project. And that allows the cross-functional teams to get on the same page and see each other's points of view at the same time. So we also are fostering transparency. In large corporates, there's a lot of silos because cross-functional teams are so focused on their one job, right? That they don't get the chance to always see that bird's eye view or see each other's points of view. And so we're the ones who come in to help them see that. And of course, this is all about relationship building. So we have to really align all the cross-functional collaboration around both, internal processes and procedures. So this is not a job that AI can take over. It's way too complex. It's very strategic. It's very high level. And AI just doesn't have that capability, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. In my opinion, that's my perspective. So what are some stakeholder or service design deliverables, right? We do stakeholder interviews, customer interviews. We run stakeholder and user workshops. We create personas, journey maps, service blueprints, and even wireframes and prototypes. What you will find is that there's not going to be many service designer titles when you're looking for a job. Service design is more what consulting and freelancers do. So if you go for UX research and UX design roles within a consulting company, that's service design. If you start your own UX freelance business, that's service design. And, here's an example from Nielsen Norman Group on what a service blueprint looks like to get everybody on the same page. And yes, this is like a classic consultant deliverable that we, create for some of our complex projects. But sometimes the paper doesn't mean anything, right? What the true value of service design is those soft skills, is that facilitation, managing the tension and conflict between internal teams, and optimizing business processes to have a lasting impact on the business, on how the business grows and scales. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to create a blueprint like this one. Consultants will create a blueprint because clients get wowed by this fancy piece of paper that visualizes the end process. And this is really more of a sales and marketing tool. So when we would create blueprints for our clients, they would kind of frame it in their office, right? And be like, okay, this is our source of truth. But it was really more of like a sales deliverable or a marketing deliverable to keep the client always thinking about us. Because the ultimate deliverable was actually creating that internal tool and actually optimizing processes for the business and moving the needle in terms of business impact. The service design blueprint is just a piece of paper. So, but being more than just a piece of paper, it's sometimes really helpful for us creatives to get on the same page, right? So in a lot of consulting teams, we usually work as groups of designers and researchers, and we have to think about both front stage and backstage processes so that we can visualize it in a service design blueprint. So when we think about front stage processes, we're thinking about channels, products, touch points, and interfaces. And this is anything that interfaces with the customer. That's what we deem front stage, is anything that the customer or prospective customer interacts with. When we think about backstage processes, we're thinking about policies, technologies, infrastructures, and systems. So we're thinking about anything that employees interact with. And those are the backstage processes. And a really great way to kind of visualize what service design is to think of the front stage as a stage, right? And our customers are seeing the elements of the business that are available to them and that they can, understand and see. But there's a whole backstage happening in every business that, we're unable to see as customers and clients, that really helps support those front stage processes. And so now we're kind of getting into, now I hope for you that, service design is becoming more tangible for you, and it's something that you can kind of visualize yourself doing, or maybe you're not doing it, maybe you don't like it. But now we're transitioning from more service design for large companies to actually designing a service or designing a business. And this is more at the startup level. And this is really to help you understand the business model. So kind of expanding on that definition of service design is getting something done for an organization and considering the employee experience. But designing a service includes addressing touch points that create a customer's journey or interaction with a brand. And then showcasing how that front stage process is going to be supported by different backstage processes. So you're actually co-creating with your client on the business model itself, especially if you're designing a new service. And so that kind of leads to more expanded roles of where service design can go at a high level. So service design is really a lot about business development, right? And policy revisions. We're really thinking about new business opportunities for our clients. Maybe we want to help our client create a new product or service. Maybe we want to help them enter a new market. Maybe we want to help them make a big business decision, or we want to de-risk certain products or services as they're entering new markets or localizing to specific countries. When we're thinking about, designing a business from a back-end perspective, we have to think about their internal operations via service blueprints, and expose those redundancies, those frustrations, those unwanted costs, and provide a bird's eye view to promote cross-functional collaboration and increase operational efficiency. So we're really tweaking the business model of that business. And then it goes into venture building, right? We might be de-risking startup operations through rapid prototyping and iteration. A lot of times you might need that service design perspective at venture capital firms and, working for these kind of venture-based accelerators like Y Combinator, where you're kind of picking apart a startup's business model. And then kind of seeing, okay, how can we rethink elements within that business model? And so service design essentially weaves design value into operations and business strategy. And there's different paths you can take in terms of service design. So again, like I had mentioned, service design is usually practiced in consultancies. And so if you're looking for a service designer job, you need to look for UX researcher and UX designer roles at a company, a consulting company. There are certain companies that actually bring service design in-house, especially if they have really proprietary internal processes. So I know that Netflix has a whole team that focuses on building content production tools internally for Netflix because their processes are so proprietary, and they don't want to, bring in outside consultants to solve their problems. They're basically building it in-house. So it really just depends by, reading the job description, whether that's a service design role or not. But you're not going to find many service designer titles out there. And I really like these visualizations of what service design entails. So service design entails the whole business model. And then you go into customer experience, which entails the customer experience, both pre-purchase, during purchase, post-purchase, and just maintaining that customer's relationship with the brand. And then we get into UX design and UI design. So again, service design is very much a systems thinking approach, and really, can be both analog and digital. And this is another visualization that I think is really helpful to showcase what a service designer does versus what a UX researcher or product designer does. And service design is, again, always about having that bird's eye view and thinking in terms of systems and thinking in terms of the business model. So that is the end to our presentation. I will pause here. We're just in time. We have about 5 minutes left. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them at this point. I see a question from Christina. Do certain tasks not count as service design if you are part of the stakeholder base and didn't want to do research/interviews? For context, I transitioned big ad projects from old software, Adobe XD, to new software, Figma, and added more streamlined time-saving moments from the agency I worked for. For 2 to 3 years, I was the only designer who worked on these particular tasks, but I onboarded designers and updated processes. I also did a similar thing by doing some data migration and cutting down time by days worth or of work on both. So I would say, Christina, this is more focused on optimizing the design team operations. If you were transitioning software from Adobe to Figma, service design is about optimizing not only one team's operations, but multiple team operations, right? So we're thinking about collaboration touch points between design and marketing and product management and development and QA. And we're seeing that bird's eye view. But yes, to your point, you can rebrand a project like that as service design. I would actually say that project, it sounds like it's more of a design systems project to me. So I would also consider branding that as a design systems project. Another question from Alandria, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. Could you please elaborate on how your consulting experience helped you in service design? So again, I was able to see the bird's eye view of things. The beauty of working in consulting is I got to work across multiple industries like the automotive industry, healthcare, consumer products, e-commerce, social media, and I got to see the different ways that these different types of businesses operated. I got to see the bird's eye view of how they operated. And that gave me a sense of what I liked and what I didn't like. I was more attracted to certain industries over other industries. And it gave me a sense of not thinking beyond just the design team, right? Thinking in terms of how the whole business operates together. And in consulting, I will say that sometimes we get overly focused on design deliverables and we don't fully understand the executive level or the business model. So I've always tried to push myself to think at the bird's eye view level and to think about, from an executive's perspective, how would they want to grow and scale a business? And that's something consultants touch upon. At that point in my career, I was more of a junior researcher and designer transitioning into senior UX design and research work. So I did not see the full bird's eye view, right? I was not the director of UX who was scoping those projects, but I was seeing how the director of UX scoped those projects with clients. Then when I moved into my grad school and I had to, it was a 2-year grad school program at UPenn, I had to pay my mortgage, so I was working a lot of freelance jobs in UX to pay my bills. That's when I became the person scoping the projects, right? I had worked under directors who had scoped projects for me. Now I was the one doing the scoping, and it was for more startup-based and small business-based clients. And then that helped me as I learned more about business strategy and entrepreneurship. I learned enough to start designing services and designing my own business. And I failed multiple times. When I was in grad school, or by the time I had gotten to grad school, I had failed at, I would say, 2 or 3 different businesses before finally hitting on a success on an actual revenue generating business. And it takes time, right? That's why we have to get really comfortable with our design process and comfortable with our failures, but we have to learn from those failures. And so now I'm really comfortable designing products and services for startups, setting up research and design processes for companies, and really seeing more of that bird's eye view over time. Any other questions? All right, I will wait 3 seconds and then thank you all for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday to learn about UX and service design. I will be posting this video to YouTube, so if you want to come back to it, you're welcome to do so. So again, thanks so much for joining us and hope to see you at another event. Thank you so much. And yes, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Awesome. Great to see everyone.